A heart-shaped pendant. It was simple, but beautiful. He held it in his hands, imagining how it would look on his mother. He smiled softly and checked the price tag. It wasn't cheap, but with his saved-up money, he could manage it. He walked slowly toward the counter, waiting for his turn. Around him, shoppers moved freely, chatting, picking out items, and paying without trouble. But Jamal felt the weight of someone's stare. He noticed Mrs. Carter glaring at him from across the store. He shifted uncomfortably but kept walking toward the cashier. Just as he reached the counter, Mrs. Carter stepped in front of him, blocking his way. "Let me see that," she demanded, grabbing the necklace from his hands. Jamal blinked in surprise. I was going to buy it," he said softly, pulling the folded cash from his pocket to show her. But she didn't look at the money. Instead, she raised her voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I know what you were trying to do," she accused. "Don't play innocent with me. You were going to steal this." The words hit Jamal like a heavy stone. He froze, his mouth opening but no sound coming out at first. Around him, people stopped and turned to look. A murmur spread among the shoppers. Jamal felt his cheeks burn. "I wasn't stealing," he finally managed to whisper. "I wanted to pay. This is for my mom." He held out the money again, his hand trembling. But Mrs. Carter ignored him, waving her hand dismissively as though he didn't matter. "That's what they all say," she muttered. Then, with a sharp voice, she told the security guard, "Call the police." The guard hesitated for a moment, looking at Jamal's nervous face, but Mrs. Carter's tone left no room for argument. "Call them," she barked. The guard obeyed, dialing quickly, while Jamal stood frozen in disbelief. He had never been in trouble before. He was the kind of boy who helped his teachers, carried groceries for neighbors, and stayed out of fights. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal. His chest tightened, and his throat felt dry. The necklace was gone from his hands, the money ignored. All he could feel was shame. The sound of police sirens faintly echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Customers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others watching silently. A young cashier who recognized Jamal from the neighborhood tried to speak up. "Mrs. Carter, I know him. He's a good kid. He comes here often." But Mrs. Carter shut her down with a glare. "Stay out of this. You don't know what he's capable of." The young cashier bit her lip and stepped back, her face filled with frustration and helplessness. Jamal's eyes darted toward the store doors as he heard the sirens grow closer. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew what would happen when the officers arrived. They would believe the manager. They wouldn't believe him. He was just a kid. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on his small frame. Slowly, he whispered, almost to himself, "Can I call my dad?" His voice was soft, almost drowned out by the murmur of the crowd. But those words carried his last bit of hope. If anyone could help him, it was his father. The sirens stopped outside, and blue lights flashed against the glass doors of the store. Jamal's hands shook as he clutched his backpack strap. He felt trapped, caught in a nightmare he hadn't created. Mrs. Carter folded her arms, standing tall, satisfied that she had done the right thing. The security guard stood uneasily by her side, clearly uncomfortable. The young cashier kept her eyes on Jamal, silently wishing she could do something more. And Jamal, standing alone in the middle of the store, with strangers' eyes locked on him, felt smaller than ever. Yet deep down, a quiet spark of faith remained. His father always told him, "No matter what happens, tell the truth, and stand tall." Jamal repeated those words silently as the police officers pushed the doors open and walked inside. And just as Jamal lowered his head, preparing for what would come, he clung to one thought: "My dad will." The store doors swung open and two uniformed officers stepped inside, their boots heavy against the polished floor. The blue and red lights from their car outside flickered against the glass, painting the store in sudden flashes of color. The shoppers who had been whispering moments ago fell quiet, watching closely. Jamal felt his knees weaken. He had never been this close to trouble in his life. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry, and he wished more than anything that his father was there already. But for now, all he had were his words. Mrs. Carter quickly marched toward the officers with a stern expression, pointing back at Jamal. "That's him," she announced confidently. "I caught him trying to steal jewelry. He thinks he can just walk out without paying." Her voice carried across the store, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people gasped. Others looked at Jamal with pity. The young cashier who knew him from the neighborhood shook her head, whispering to herself, "This isn't right." The officers approached Jamal, their faces serious. One of them asked sharply, "Son, what's in your bag?" Jamal froze, clutching his backpack straps. His voice came out small. "Just my schoolbooks, and my drawings." The officer extended his hand. "Open it up." Jamal hesitated, looking around as if someone might step in for him, but nobody moved. Finally, with trembling hands, he opened the zipper. Inside were notebooks, a pencil case, and a sketchbook filled with his drawings. No jewelry, no stolen items, nothing but the belongings of a kid who had just left school. The officer glanced at Mrs. Carter. "Ma'am, I don't see anything here." But she was determined. "Check his pockets," she snapped. Jamal's chest tightened. He reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out the folded bills he had saved. "This is what I was going to use," he explained softly. "It's for my mom's birthday. I wanted to buy her the necklace." He looked down, ashamed, as though even explaining himself made him guilty. Mrs. Carter crossed her arms. "That's just an excuse. Kids like him always have a story ready." Her words stung, sharp as needles, and Jamal bit his lip to hold back tears. The young cashier took a small step forward. "But he didn't steal anything," she said firmly, her voice shaking but determined. "I've seen him around. He's a good boy. Please, you're making a mistake." The officers glanced between the cashier and Mrs. Carter, uncertain. One of them said, "Ma'am, do you have any proof he tried to take something?" Mrs. Carter scoffed. "Do I need proof? Look at him, he was lingering in the aisles with that backpack. You know what that means." Her words hung in the air like a cold shadow. Jamal felt the world closing in around him. He remembered his father's words, spoken so many times at the dinner table, "When people don't believe you, keep calm. Tell the truth. That's your strength." Taking a deep breath, Jamal whispered, "Please, can I call my dad?" His voice trembled but carried a quiet determination. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Who's your dad, son?" Jamal swallowed hard. "He'll explain everything. Please, let me call him." Mrs. Carter rolled her eyes. "We don't need his father here to make excuses for him." But Jamal clutched his backpack tightly, holding on to the only hope he had. "Please. Just let me call him." The officer sighed, sensing the boy's fear. "All right. Give us the number." With shaky hands, Jamal recited the digits he knew by heart. The officer dialed and stepped aside to speak. Jamal stood in silence, staring at the floor, while Mrs. Carter paced impatiently. The minutes felt like hours. Every tick of the clock made Jamal's heart race faster. The shoppers whispered again, their voices a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some shook their heads at Mrs. Carter's harshness. Others simply watched, unsure of what to believe. Finally, the officer returned. "He's on his way." Jamal exhaled in relief, though his fear still lingered. Mrs. Carter raised her eyebrows. "And who exactly is his father? Some local mechanic? A bus driver? This won't change what he did." She looked at Jamal with cold eyes, convinced she was right. The young cashier clenched her fists, wishing she could shout the truth that Jamal hadn't done anything wrong. But she held her tongue, knowing her job was on the line. Jamal stood in the middle of the store, feeling the eyes of strangers burn into him. His stomach churned, his body trembling, but inside his heart was one strong hope: his dad. His father had always been his shield, his guide, his calm voice in the storm. If anyone could help, it was him. Outside, the sound of a car pulling up echoed faintly. Jamal lifted his head, his eyes searching the glass doors. The shoppers turned too, curious about who would arrive. The officers straightened, preparing to speak with the boy's father. Mrs. Carter smirked, folding her arms tightly across her chest, certain she would be proven right. But Jamal knew better. Deep down, he could already picture his father's face, the calm eyes, the steady voice, the man who always told him, "Never forget your worth." And as the door opened, Jamal's heart leapt with a mixture of fear and relief. His father had come. The moment that would change everything had just begun. The door opened slowly, and Jamal's father stepped inside. He carried himself with a calm, steady presence that immediately drew attention. He wasn't rushing, nor did he look panicked, but there was a strength in his walk that made everyone pause. Jamal's eyes filled with relief the moment he saw him. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. He hurried to his father's side, clutching his sleeve like a lifeline. Mr. Davis rested his hand gently on his son's shoulder and looked around the room. His gaze passed over the shoppers, the police officers, and finally landed on Mrs. Carter, who stood with her arms crossed, still convinced of her judgment. He spoke in a quiet voice, but it carried across the store. "What seems to be the problem here?" Mrs. Carter straightened, speaking quickly before anyone else could answer. "Your son was caught stealing jewelry," she declared confidently. "I had no choice but to call the police. We don't tolerate thieves in this store." Jamal opened his mouth to protest, but his father gave him a small nod, silent encouragement to stay calm. Mr. Davis turned to the officers. "Is that true? Did you find anything on him?" The officers shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. "No, sir. We searched his bag. It was just school supplies. And he had money on him." "But the manager insists. Mr. Davis repeated, his tone firm but measured. "So no proof, just her word." The room went silent. Shoppers leaned in, sensing something important was about to happen. Jamal looked up at his father, his fear slowly melting into hope. Mrs. Carter, feeling the eyes of the crowd, lifted her chin. "We can't be too careful. Kids like him, they linger, they act suspicious. I know the signs. I've been in retail for 20 years. Mr. Davis studied her face for a long moment, then turned back to Jamal. "Son, tell me exactly what happened." Jamal took a shaky breath and explained. He told how he had come after school to buy a gift for his mom, how he had picked the necklace, how Mrs. Carter grabbed it before he could pay, and how she called the police without listening to him. He showed the cash again, holding it up for everyone to see. His words were quiet but clear. Mr. Davis nodded, then faced the officers. "You've heard his side. You found no stolen property. And you see the money he brought to pay. Tell me, what law did my son break?" The officers exchanged glances. One of them sighed. "None, sir. We didn't see him commit any crime." The crowd began murmuring again. A few shoppers shook their heads at the unfairness. The young cashier who had tried to defend Jamal earlier looked relieved that someone was finally listening. Mrs. Carter's face tightened. "This is a waste of time. I did what was necessary. If I hadn't acted, we could have lost merchandise." She folded her arms, trying to keep control of the situation. Mr. Davis took a slow step toward her, his presence calm yet commanding. "Ma'am, what you did wasn't protection. It was assumption. You saw my son and decided he was guilty before he even reached the counter. That's not security. That's prejudice. His voice was still calm, but it carried weight. Mrs. Carter's lips tightened. I was doing my job. Mr. Davis looked directly into her eyes. I know this store's policies better than anyone. And what you did is not company policy. It's personal bias. The words confused her for a moment. How would you know our policies? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Mr. Davis gave a faint smile, not of amusement, but of quiet authority. Because I wrote them. The room went dead silent. Every shopper, every employee, and even the officers froze. Mrs. Carter's face paled. What? She stammered. Mr. Davis straightened, his voice steady and clear. I am the CEO of this company. Every store, every branch including this one operates under my leadership. And you, in your rush to judgment, just humiliated my son in front of an entire crowd, without a shred of evidence. The crowd gasped. The young cashier covered her mouth, her eyes wide in disbelief. The security guard stepped back, suddenly nervous. The officers exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of the moment. Jamal looked up at his father with pride and relief. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt safe. His father wasn't just his protector at home. Here, in this place of unfairness, his father's voice carried power that no one could ignore. Mrs. Carter stuttered, I didn't know. I had no idea. Her confidence was gone, replaced by fear. Mr. Davis kept his eyes on her. It shouldn't matter who he is, or who I am. Every customer deserves fairness. Every child deserves respect. But today, you showed none of that. The silence was heavy, filled only with the sound of Jamal's breathing as he stood close to his father. The truth had been spoken, and nothing in that store would ever feel the same again. And in that charged moment, as everyone waited for what Mr. Davis would say next, the weight of Mrs. Carter's choices hung in the air like a storm about to break. Their eyes moving between the shaken store manager and the calm father who had just revealed himself as the CEO. Jamal stood close to his father, clutching his sleeve, feeling for the first time that day that he wasn't alone in this storm. The young cashier who had spoken up earlier smiled faintly, almost as if to say, finally, someone sees the truth. Mrs. Carter tried to steady her voice, but her words came out weak and trembling. I didn't know. I thought I was protecting the store. Mr. Davis turned to her with eyes that were both firm and disappointed. You weren't protecting the store, he said quietly. You were protecting your assumptions. My son walked in here with money in his pocket, ready to buy a gift for his mother. And instead of seeing a customer, you saw a problem. You treated him as guilty before he even had the chance to act. The crowd nodded, some whispering in agreement. The security guard looked down at his shoes, ashamed he hadn't spoken up. The police officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had allowed themselves to be pulled into a situation without true evidence. Jamal watched his father, amazed by the way he spoke calm, but with a power that filled the room. Mr. Davis wasn't yelling, he wasn't angry in a wild way, he was measured, deliberate, every word landing with weight. Mrs. Carter swallowed hard. I didn't mean, she stopped, unable to finish her sentence. Her earlier confidence had completely vanished. Mr. Davis continued, do you realize what you've done? You've humiliated a child in public. You've called the police on him. You've placed fear in his heart, all because you didn't stop to look at the facts. You've cost him his dignity, and that is not something you can replace with a simple apology. The young cashier stepped forward again, her voice trembling but clear. He's right. Jamal didn't do anything. I tried to say it earlier, but no one listened. Mr. Davis looked at her with appreciation. Thank you, he said softly. Speaking the truth is never easy when you feel alone. But you showed more courage in that moment than some of the people who had the power to do the right thing. The cashier blushed, her eyes watering, knowing she had been acknowledged in front of everyone. Mrs. Carter's lips quivered. She finally asked the question that had been hanging unspoken in the air. Am I fired? The store grew still again. Even Jamal held his breath. Mr. Davis didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly toward the necklace display where Jamal had first chosen his mother's gift. He picked up a necklace gently, almost as if reminding everyone why they were really here. Then he turned back to face the manager. You will be suspended, he said firmly. There will be a full review of your actions, and depending on the findings, the company will decide whether you can continue. But for now, you will not be managing this store. Your behavior today goes against everything this company stands for. Mrs. Carter's face fell. She nodded faintly, tears brimming in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She knew there was nothing left to say. The police officers spoke next, almost apologetically. We're sorry, sir, one said to Mr. Davis. And to you, young man, he added, turning to Jamal. We should have listened more carefully before jumping to conclusions. Jamal gave a small nod. His father squeezed his shoulder gently, reassuring him. Mr. Davis looked around the store, speaking not just to Mrs. Carter, but to everyone gathered. Let this be a lesson. Rules mean nothing if they are not rooted in fairness. Authority means nothing if it is used to shame rather than protect. And dignity, especially the dignity of a child, should never be taken lightly. There was a soft round of applause from some of the shoppers, a sign of respect for his words. The young cashier clapped too, tears streaming quietly down her face. Jamal looked up at his father, pride swelling in his chest. He had walked into the store alone, small and powerless, but now, standing beside his father, he felt tall. He realized something important, that calm strength could be more powerful than shouting, and truth could be louder than lies. Mrs. Carter lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She walked slowly toward the back office, her steps heavy, the weight of her choices pressing down on her shoulders. Mr. Davis turned back to Jamal. Are you all right, son? Jamal nodded, though his eyes were still wet. I just wanted to buy Mom a gift, he whispered. His father smiled gently. And you still will. He handed the necklace back to Jamal and guided him toward the cashier. As Jamal paid for the necklace with his saved money, the young cashier gave him a warm smile. Your mom will love this, she said softly. Jamal smiled back, a small spark of joy finally returning to his heart. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the whispers lingered. People would talk about this day for a long time. They had witnessed a father defend his son with calm authority, a manager brought low by her own unfairness, and a young boy regain his dignity in front of everyone. For Jamal, the day would never be forgotten. The fear he had felt when the police walked in, the sting of being called a thief, the relief of seeing his father walk through the doors, all of it had carved itself deep into his memory. But so had the lesson, that truth, dignity, and fairness always had a voice, as long as someone was brave enough to speak it. And as they stepped out of the store together, Jamal holding the small bag with the necklace inside, he knew that the hardest part of the ordeal was over. But he also knew that his father wasn't finished, not yet. There were still words to be spoken, changes to be made, and lessons to be carried forward. The world outside was calm, the flashing lights of the police car now gone, the air cool against their faces. Jamal took a deep breath, finally free from the heavy weight of the moment. His father rested a hand on his shoulder once more. Let's go home, son, he said quietly. We've done what needed to be done here. But even as they left, everyone inside the store was still buzzing, knowing they had witnessed something that would change the way things were run forever. When Jamal and his father stepped out of the store that evening, the tension of the past hour clung to them like a heavy shadow. The crowd inside was still buzzing with whispers, replaying every word that had been spoken, but for Jamal, the worst of the storm was behind him. He held the small bag with his mother's necklace inside, gripping it tightly as if it carried not just the gift, but the meaning of everything that had just happened. His father walked calmly beside him, his presence steady, as though nothing could shake him. Yet inside, Jamal knew his father was carrying the weight of the moment too. The ride home was quiet at first. Jamal sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window at the fading evening sky. He thought about the way the police had looked at him, the way Mrs. Carter's words had cut into his heart, and how powerless he had felt in front of everyone. He also thought about the moment his father revealed who he was, and how the entire store froze in shock. That memory gave him comfort. His father had been his shield, just as he always promised he would be. Finally, Jamal broke the silence. "Dad, was I really that suspicious? Did I really look like I was stealing?" His voice was soft, but it carried the heavy weight of his doubts. Mr. Davis glanced at him, his expression calm but serious. "No, son. You looked like what you are, a young man buying a gift for his mother. What happened today had nothing to do with you, and everything to do with someone else's prejudice. Remember this, people may judge you before they know you. But their judgment doesn't define you." Jamal nodded slowly, letting his father's words sink in. He realized then that what had hurt the most wasn't the false accusation itself, it was the way people had looked at him, as if he was already guilty. He promised himself he would never let those looks make him feel small again. When they arrived home, the smell of dinner filled the air. Jamal's mother greeted them warmly, not yet aware of what had happened. Jamal handed her the little bag with the necklace, his hands still trembling. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said quietly. She opened the bag, her eyes lighting up as she saw the silver necklace. Tears filled her eyes as she clasped it around her neck. "Oh, Jamal, it's beautiful," she whispered. She hugged him tightly, but as she did, she felt the tension in his body. She pulled back, concerned. "What happened?" she asked softly. Jamal hesitated, but Mr. Davis placed a hand on his shoulder. "He was brave today," he said. "He faced something no child should face, and he stood tall through it." He briefly explained the incident, Mrs. Carter's assumptions, the police, the confrontation. Jamal's mother listened with tears in her eyes, her hands trembling as she held onto her son. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," she said, kissing his forehead. "But I am so proud of you." That night, Jamal lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He replayed everything again and again, the fear, the embarrassment, and finally, the moment of truth when his father revealed who he was. He realized something important: respect should not come because of who your father is, or what title he holds. Respect should come because you are a human being, deserving of dignity. And that was the lesson he carried in his heart as he drifted off to sleep. In the weeks that followed, news of the incident spread quietly among employees and shoppers. Mr. Davis kept his word. He ordered an internal review, not just of Mrs. Carter, but of the store's culture. Training programs were announced across the company, focused on fairness, equality, and respect for all customers. Every employee, from cashiers to managers, would undergo sessions to understand bias and learn how to treat people with dignity. Mrs. Carter faced her consequences. She was suspended during the investigation, and though some felt sorry for her, many agreed that her actions had been unfair. She learned, painfully, that power without understanding could lead to downfall. The young cashier, on the other hand, was quietly promoted after her courage to speak up was recognized. Mr. Davis had seen her honesty, and he wanted people like her to represent the company's values. As for Jamal, his life went on. He went back to school, hung out with his friends, and kept drawing in his sketchbook. But inside, he had changed. He was no longer the same boy who walked into that store nervous and unsure. He had seen how quickly the world could turn against him, but he had also seen how truth and calm strength could turn everything around. His father's words became a compass he would carry forever: tell the truth. Stand tall. Don't let anyone take your dignity. Months later, Jamal walked into the same store with his parents by his side. Things felt different. The employees greeted him warmly. Some even remembered his name. The young cashier smiled proudly from behind the counter. The air no longer carried judgment, but respect. And though Jamal still felt a small sting of memory when he stepped inside, he also felt stronger because he had faced the storm and come out standing. In the end, the necklace became more than just a gift for his mother. It became a symbol of the day Jamal learned about dignity, fairness, and the power of standing tall even when the world tries to push you down. His father had taught him that leadership wasn't about titles or power, it was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and using authority to make the world fairer for everyone. And so, while the world moved on, Jamal carried that day with him like a quiet fire in his heart. He knew life would bring more challenges, more moments where people would judge him unfairly. But now, he also knew he could face them with truth, with calm strength, and with the unshakable belief that his worth was never in question. That was the lesson he would never forget.